Joan Esposito, live.
Celebrating our power to bring about change.
Local.
Everybody has to work together.
And progressive.
I think you get the idea.
On WCPT 820.
Hi there. Is Tuesday your favorite day of the week? It's mine. You know why Tuesday is my favorite day of the week? Because Tuesday is still the beginning of the week, so you still have everything to deal with. And so you have all those days of work to look forward to. And yet, you're not getting anywhere. It's just like Monday. It's Monday by another name. That's what Tuesday is. You know, maybe we should just call this Second Monday. Hi, thanks for being with me this Tuesday, February 18th. Tomorrow we are going to get Governor Pritzker's big budget speech, his State of the State. That should be interesting. He'll be making that speech in Springfield. You know, it's a good thing we live in Illinois because California, Illinois, and New York, as far as I'm concerned, they're the only states that you can really count on. I don't want to hear this purple stuff. I only want blue, and the only blue states that I think we can regularly count on are California, Illinois, and New York. Yes, Wisconsin is trying to be more responsive to its voters, trying to counter the Republicans who, like the Republicans in Florida and the Republicans in North Carolina, they just want to take over. North Carolina, the Republican Party doesn't have a supermajority, but they lose an election, and then the remaining Republicans do everything in their power to strip that person. Jeff Jackson, great North Carolina first-term congressperson, gerrymandered out of a second term, ran for state attorney, won that election. Now Republicans in North Carolina are trying to prevent him from bringing any court cases, which is exactly the job description, yeah. So we're very lucky, and we have to work very hard to hang on to this. Remember, you're only one election away from things changing, assuming, of course, that your elections are not gerrymandered and don't have a Republican partisan legislature that will break every rule in the book and every norm and every ethic to try to hang on to power, because, you know, they know that they cannot. If everybody votes, they won't win. Why do you think that is? Because their policies aren't popular. Their policies are for a minority of people. It is minority rule. So votes are so important. And don't think for a minute that if it's a local election, you can sit it out because it isn't that important. Municipal elections, village elections, city elections, township elections, county elections, those people make the laws that you live by. Those people set the rules that we live our lives by. Every vote counts, and it counts so much more at the local level than it does even at the state level and certainly at the federal level. Not that those elections aren't important too, but please don't ever let anyone you care about say that they're not going to vote because their vote isn't important. Explain to them that even if they live in a blue state that's liable to go for the Democrat for president, doesn't mean they stay home. it doesn't mean they stay home. You know why? Because there will be other races on that ballot. People who have a much more direct effect on your daily life. How much tax are you going to pay? Where are you going to pay it? What laws are you going to live under? Every election matters. Every vote matters. And it is the job of those of us who already believe that to make sure that the people around us understand it as well. So we're going to hear the state of the state tomorrow, see what Governor Pritzker has to say about that. Interesting article in Rolling Stone. FAA employees say Trump and Musk's purge is a threat to air safety because, you see, they're purging government. They want to get rid of Stephen Miller was on CNN a little while ago, and he said, well, you know, we're getting rid of everybody, and then we can kind of figure out who we want to bring back. What company operates like that? Oh, a Kraft Incorporated. Yeah, we're firing all of our employees in the mustard division because then we can figure out who to bring back. Except what happens to the mustard while they're gone? They are trying to create enough savings. Is it savings, really? Do you really want the people who keep your air travel safe? Do you want those people sent home so we can figure out which ones matter? And how are we going to figure that out? We're going to wait for a few plane crashes and see who could have prevented that and then rehire those people? There's one part of the FAA, it's called, has some weird name, like the obstruction division, and they're all being sent home. The obstacle impact team, that's what they're called, the obstacle impact team. They were already understaffed. Now, because of the people who've been let go, somebody from that team says there are 4 people remaining to do the work of 15 people. Do you know what the obstacle impact team does? I didn't. They're the ones who figure out what are the hazards, you know, buildings, windmills, other cranes, high wires, the things that airplanes might run into. It's their job to figure out what those things are. And as those things pop up, like a new building here, a new set of windmills there, they make sure the aviation community knows about the possible obstacles that they might impact with. 15 people were charged with doing that nationwide. Now there are 4. A lot of these FAA employees are saying, don't believe what you're hearing from Elon Musk. Air safety is definitely at risk. Okay. Here's part of the Rolling Stone article. As news of the purge, this is from the Federal Aviation Administration, that purge, not to be confused with any of the other purges. As news of the purge circulated Friday night and over the weekend, FAA staffers and personnel who were already preparing for the worst were stunned at Trump and Musk's recklessness. Multiple sources tell the Rolling Stone. One FAA official said their response was, "Holy hell." Asked today about this by Rolling Stone, Trump and Trump's White House and Musk replied that it is fake news. Fake news. Fake news. Now, by fake news, do you think they mean that they didn't actually get rid of all but 4 people who were trying to figure out where and what are the things that, you know, airplanes might run into? Was that the fake part? Because that's true. Or was the fake part that 4 people can do the work that was previously done by 15? You ever worked in one of those companies where to save money they quote-unquote downsize? And what that downsizing means is that your boss comes to your desk and said, hey, you know what Martha over there used to do? And you say, yeah, I have a vague idea what Martha over there used to do. Well, good, because you're now doing it. Oh, I'm doing Martha's job instead of mine? That's not what I said. No, you're doing your job and Martha's job. I think we've all worked in a place like that. And what happens? Do things start to slide? Do you prioritize? Well, I can't do everything I used to do and everything Martha used to do, so I better figure out, like, what's the most important. Okay, I'll do these 3 things, and then all the rest of it, I'll do it if I have time, but chances are I'm not going to have time. That's what you do. That's the only way you keep your head above water. So 4 full-time employees are now trying to do the work that was previously done by 15 full-time employees. What do you think's going to slide? Where do you think they're going to cut corners? Well, let's see. We can't do everything anymore, so let's pick the geography around, I don't know, 3 or 4 of our biggest airports, and we'll just worry about the obstacles around them. And the rest of it, well, we'll get to it if we can. We'll get to it if we can. Great. I'm supposed to fly out to see my daughter in California next month, and somebody actually said to me a few days ago, oh, are you worried about air travel? And I was like, no. But now that I have read this Rolling Stone article, I'm a little more concerned than I was before. And yes, I could probably take Amtrak out there if I wanted to spend, 3 days on a train, which is great if you've got the time. I mean, if you don't have a job to get back to, if you're not taking days off of work, if you've got the time, look into that. Of course, they're getting ready to trim Amtrak as well. A lot of those longer routes for Amtrak are not real profitable. So even if I had the time to take a Greyhound bus or an Amtrak train, I don't know how much longer I'm going to have those kind of options. But hey, he promised us cheaper eggs, right? Oh, that didn't happen. He promised a better working economy. What do you mean inflation's up? You know how I said I was going to point to various states and counties and areas that voted for Trump and who are now feeling the pain? Like Kansas farmers who are completely panicked. Like junior senator from Alabama, Katie Britt, who was quite the critic of Joe Biden and now has realized that Donald Trump is cutting research money to the University of Alabama, which, as I mentioned yesterday, is the state of Alabama's #1 employer. There is no corporation, there is no entity in Alabama that hires more people, that has more employees than the University of Alabama, which just had all of its National Institutes of Health funding cut off. And all of a sudden, Katie Britt is like, wait a minute. And all these Republicans are saying the same thing. Oh, we think what Trump's doing is great. It's absolutely great. But surely there will be a cutout for us. Surely the University of Alabama can be some kind of special deal where we still get funds, even if all those terrible universities in blue states don't get their funds. Dude, you remember us? I'm Katie Britt. Remember how I've always been on your side? You're hurting us. The Republicans in Kansas State farmers sell millions of dollars of crops to USAID. Those crops then sent to countries where people are starving. But Musk doesn't want there to be any more USAID. Is selling it to people like, this is ridiculous. Our money shouldn't be going overseas, right? Right? Except it isn't all money. It's crops. And farmers in Kansas are in a panic. They are in a panic. So much so that Republicans in Kansas are trying to find the specific programs of USAID that buy Kansas farmers' crops. And they're trying to put those programs under the Agriculture Department. These specific sub-programs of USAID buy the food the Kansas City farmers grow, except USAID is going away because we don't want to spend any money on foreign countries, except, oops, a lot of that money was actually spent here. So instead of trying to stand up to Trump and saying, don't get rid of USAID, let's just find those specific programs, and we'll pass legislation that says those programs aren't part of USAID. They're part of USDA, the Agriculture Department, which still exists. So we don't have to stand up to Trump and Musk, and we can still get a cutout for Kansas City farmers. This is something we're going to be hearing a lot of. I want to share with you a couple of, do we have time for? Yeah, I think we have time for both of them. A couple of people, Democrats, who were on the television. Maryland Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen was on with Rachel Maddow last night and talked about this Trump administration cost cutting. And by the way, it isn't cost cutting that's going to save money. It's cost cutting to offset the tax breaks they want to give to Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg. They want to give them billions in tax cuts. And because they know that some Republicans will stand up to Trump if it looks like the deficit is going to go through the roof, they're going to find cost savings. You don't need 15 full-time people trying to figure out where the obstacles are that planes might fly into. 4 people can do that job. So that Elon Musk can get a tax cut. Democrat Chris Van Hollen was talking about this scheme of the Trump administration. Listen to this.
They're not trying to save money. They're trying to destroy the U.S. government. They're trying to make the U.S. government stop functioning in ways that hurt people and that hurt this country. And that, to me, doesn't seem like it's driven by fiscal concerns.
I think there's several things going on. I mean, I definitely think that they want to attack the organs of government and those important services to the American people because they don't like government. I do think they want to create the impression, Rachel, that they're making these huge, quote, efficiency gains and they're going to save all this money and therefore they're going to pay for their tax cuts. The great lie is, as you say, this has nothing to do with government efficiency, right? If you wanted to make the government more efficient, you wouldn't start by firing all the inspector generals whose job it is to look out for waste, fraud, and abuse. Doing that actually clears the way for the kind of corruption that Elon Musk would like to bring to the government. I think what they're trying to do is get the federal government to serve the already powerful and the already wealthy like Elon Musk. That's why they want to shut down the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau that goes after scam artists and fraudsters and returns billions of dollars to American consumers who got cheated. They want to privatize the National Weather Service, right? At NOAA, they want to sell it off to the highest bidder. They want to collect all this very sensitive personal information, Social Security numbers, bank accounts. So I agree that a lot of what they're doing is to destroy government, but also to so weaken it that it can then serve their purposes. And I think they want to create the impression that in the process they're saving money to pay for their tax cuts. All of it is a big lie.
Yes, it is. And don't be taken in. Well, even the people who believe everything that Trump says, sooner or later, it's going to bite them in the butt. And the problem is it's going to bite us in the butt at the same time. And we didn't vote for this nonsense. Unfortunately, a lot of the people who voted for Donald Trump are not going to really wake up and change their mind until they experience the pain of thinking that their loved one was never going to be deported because they were a good immigrant, thinking that the Republicans promised to leave Medicare and Medicaid alone was something that they would do. They're already talking about changing Medicaid. You know, let's add a work requirement, or let's take the work requirement that's there and let's boost it. Work is good. Isn't that what they said on the Associated Press? Work is good. Except that a lot of the people who get those benefits literally cannot work. They are disabled. They are chronically ill. This idea that somehow they're just laying around, doing nothing, laying on the couch watching daytime TV and just waiting for those big Medicaid medical checks to come in, that's nonsense. And I don't care if from time to time there is an incident of fraud. Anytime you have a big program, there are always going to be a small number of people who try to take advantage of it. But that doesn't mean you punish everybody. That's not Christian. Somebody who's disabled, somebody who can't work, they have a chronic illness, they're in chronic pain, and they don't make any money, and you're going to say, if you want those Medicaid benefits, you better get out there and get a job? They will try to convince you the cruelty makes sense. And if you just think about it at a surface level, you might not disagree with them. But think about the larger implications. Think about the people. When we talk about, well, you know, work is good and these Medicaid recipients ought to do more of it, who are those people? Are they capable of work? Is there work out there for them? A lot of the answers to those questions turn out to be no. So basically what we're just doing is making poor people poorer and sicker. We're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
As we do with the first hour of the show every day, we are having your texts read on the air, and we are taking your phone calls. 773-763-9278. 773-763-9278. The text line has been blowing up. Somebody sent me a link to a PBS News report from, this was posted on the website yesterday. I don't know if there was a show it was part of. Farmers feeling the weight of Trump policies with shutdown of aid. The person who sent it to me said, in this story from last night's PBS NewsHour, someone from the Kansas Farm Bureau said that he should have read Project 2025 in detail before voting for Donald. Yep. You should have, and you should have believed it. Somebody else said that they don't have a lot of sympathy for the farmers who voted overwhelmingly for Trump and are now finding themselves in deep doo-doo. You know, I don't get it. I believed everything Trump said, and I remembered what it was like the first time he was in office and all of the horrible things he tried to do. But seemingly a lot of people didn't remember that, chose to forget what he did that time around, wanted to believe what he said. You remember Trump he posted on social media, oh, thank you so much to the Heritage Foundation for this fabulous outline of my new administration, Project 2025. And then when people actually started circulating it, at least amongst the people who really are interested in politics and interested in reading this kind of stuff, and they started sounding the alarm. Hey, he wants to take apart every government agency. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, I didn't write it. And then Donald Trump got to the point where he claimed he didn't even know what it was. Thank you for doing it. I didn't write it. I don't know what it is. It's nothing to do with me. And I don't know. Did people believe that? Did they not bother? Kansas City farmers, did you not bother to look at Project 2025? Dude, this guy's going to gut us. Nope. We hate the Dems. We hate the libs. We hate government. Government is bad. Ronald Reagan brought us that. Remember, he said something like the worst words you can ever hear in your life are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. Yeah. Somebody else, as I was saying, California, Illinois, New York are the only three states I believe I can count on. Someone said that I should add Massachusetts to that list, that Massachusetts is reliably blue. So, Mark, on a tentative basis, I will add Massachusetts to my list, okay? Four states where we can count on legislators who actually want to help people. Somebody texted in that they had made a mistake on a tax return and it was a big mess and they couldn't get any help. And finally, they learned about something called the Taxpayer Advocate Service, which is part of the IRS. And working with those people, he was assigned somebody like a caseworker, and they were able to figure out where he'd gone wrong and get it all fixed. And he had been terrified there was going to be a lien placed against his home. But he got the problem fixed finally. Now, Trump, by the way, said that he is cutting the IRS budget. How long do you think the Taxpayer Advocate Service is going to continue? That's another favor he's doing to his rich buddies. When we increased the funding for the IRS, they were able to hire people who could take the time to go after rich people. And the IRS was quite blunt about it before. You know, if you were poor or middle class, you were far more likely to get audited than a really rich person. Because, you know, really rich people have a lot of lawyers and they fight everything tooth and nail, and it takes them more time and it's more expensive to try to go after them. And the IRS just didn't have it. So when Joe Biden increased the IRS budget, they were able to go after some of those people. And I can't remember the exact numbers, but the amount of money that the IRS collected that had been wrongly claimed as exemptions or deductions was staggering. It was a staggering amount of money. You want to talk about savings? Increase funding to the IRS so that, you know, the complicated tax returns filed by Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk can be audited in great detail. I mean, they're always, when it becomes public knowledge, it'll be like, yeah, Jeff Bezos last year paid like, you know, $5 in tax or $0 in tax. Somebody else just texted in that the only place really reliably blue in Illinois is Chicago. Somebody else texted in that I should add Hawaii to my list, that Hawaii is blue. But you know what? Hawaii is the state that gave us Tulsi Gabbard. Yes, she was elected to office in Hawaii. So I'm sorry, Hawaii. At best, you're on probation to be on my list. Any place that can put Tulsi Gabbard in elected office is a little suspicious to me. Let's go to the phone lines. Our good friend Jim from Chicago is on the line.
Hi, Joan. I made the tragic error of turning the TV on this morning. 6:30 this morning, they got two gentlemen on selling Trump coins with his image on the coins. So I called up. I said, you know, these are probably minimum wage workers or less because they're working for Trump. But I said, have you ever heard of a president selling merchandise on TV with his image on it? Well, why don't you call the White House if you got any complaints? They said, where is the White House? In Johannesburg, South Africa, with Elon Musk? I'll say one thing, Joan. These Christians have not taken a vow of poverty. Would you agree? Any of them? Hello, Joan?
Yeah. No, all of them, Jim. All of them, sure.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I know Musk is going to, because I call up when I see some of these ministers on, they say, send money to Africa. So I call them, I said, my God, Musk took half of his plantations he had in Africa. I said, he could help these little kids. I said, you know, take a page out of St. Francis's book and cough up your dough. But they go wild, you know. But I mean, the thing is, Joan, I'm so infuriated by that commercial. I can't believe. Now, I mean, his son-in-law got $2 billion unexplained from the Saudis. Who knows what they're going to steal and rob? In the meantime, he's selling coins. I mean, what would he sell? I mean, why does he need the money that badly? Is something he's got a screw loose or what? I mean, I really
don't get it. It's just, you know, I think we have to stop thinking of him as a president.
A human being. Or a human being.
Or as a human being. Yeah. And right. I think we have to start thinking of him as as like an organized crime boss who has visions of being a dictator. He absolutely does. I mean, you know, the Viktor Orban playbook, he's following it, you know, make people not believe in the media, make people not understand what truth is anymore, gut government agencies and fill those positions with loyalists, make the corporate people, you know, kowtow to you. I don't know. We're very confident that because we've had our democracy as long as we've had it, that we always will, that it can withstand anything. And I would love to believe that's true, but I'm not so sure. I think that people smarter than Donald Trump have figured this out, and he is a useful idiot that is allowing them to do what they want. And he has anything that makes him look good or brings him wealth, those are the only two things Donald Trump cares about. Does it make him look good? Does it make him, more? Does it make him more popular? Does it make him richer? If it can't fulfill one of those two things, it's no good.
It's just an amazing situation. They're such money-grabbing maniacs. It's unbelievable. And like you said, the plane ride to L.A., well, you got to really think twice before you get on a plane now.
Yeah. I do.
Yeah, I know it. You can see what he thought of the American public in COVID. He didn't open his mouth for a good month and a half.
Exactly.
So human life has no regard for him. As long as he can sell that image of his coins on TV.
That's
I couldn't believe that was on this morning.
When have we had a president that was hawking merchandise? Oh, my God.
Never. I know. Anyway, Joan, I didn't want to call, but I saw that commercial this morning. I'm just still baffled by it. I called a few times. I said, how can he get it? What is this? Well, call the White House, they said. I said, okay, good luck with that.
Yeah,
anyway,
really.
Joan, thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Have a good show, Joan.
Thank you. Let's go out to Denver. Cynthia is on the line. Hey, Cynthia, thanks for the call.
Hi, how are you?
So far, so good.
Yeah. Well, listen, I wanted to call and give my 2 cents about your guest yesterday that was asking for people to be patient. As I guess he brings in recovering MAGA people. I was so mad I could throw my radio because I don't have that type of compassion or feeling. I think we spend too much time bashing Trump. We already know what he is. How come we can't bash our citizens that don't vote or who voted for this and make them have more responsibility to get educated, to find out, about what their programs offer them and how it's connected to their politicians? Can our talk show hosts not allowed to do that or to educate,
Well, I've been thinking about that. I have actually been, especially this morning, I've been thinking about that because it does seem, somebody who only listens to right-wing media, there's nothing I can do about that. But I do think that there are people who don't understand, like they don't understand down ballot races, and they don't understand, civics isn't taught anymore. And how does something become a law? What's the difference between a law and an executive order? People think that and people think that government doesn't matter. They don't understand. What does USAID do? And what is soft power? And why is soft power important to us? I think that you have a good point, Cynthia. I think we need some basic education on some of these things that for those of us of a certain age, we know about, but it seems like younger people just don't get.
And I think also, Joan, our elected leaders ought to be dishing out pamphlets left and right that echo that, and you know how they draw a staff who you contact graph. They can do something like that with the bill. the bill is in the center of the graph, and then it goes this way, and then that goes this way, and then that goes...
Yeah. I think that's somebody, Cynthia, while we were talking, somebody texted in and they said, I should explain what I mean by down ballot races. So I think we have a lot on our plate here, Cynthia, and a lot of, I agree with you. I think that a part of what I do, I don't know if this particular show, maybe I should go on TikTok and say, here's your lesson for today,
Well, if I like it when you do your media Wednesdays, or I don't know if it's on Wednesday, but, once a week, carve out a show that strictly just talks about, on a national level, 1 week, and then on a local level, how the dots are connected, and grab, something like how Medicaid works. I bet you 99% of everybody that voted for Trump has some family member in the nursing home or has some of their bills paid for by Medicaid, and just watch how the ball will drop.
Mm-hmm. And those nursing homes will come to those families and say, oh, by the way, next month's bill is going to be $300 more because we're no longer getting Medicaid funds at the level we were before. And so you're going to have to make up the difference. Just like in Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama, utility company sending out letters to people saying, you have to pay a $100 surcharge because money we were getting to offset utility costs from the federal government has gone away. And so guess who's going to make up the difference? Guess who?
Joan, also the South gets much of their subsidy programs from California and the North, who have more of a tax base. So let's discover how that works, because a lot of people don't understand that the North pays for a lot of subsidy programs the South can't afford to pay for because they don't have a strong enough tax base.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, I just think it's...
here in Illinois, Cynthia, I know you're in Denver, but here in Illinois, we have some counties downstate who've said they want to secede from Illinois and they want to join Indiana. And they make these noises all the time because they hate Chicago. Cynthia, they hate Chicago. And they don't realize how much of the money that Chicago contributes to the government goes to subsidize their lives. And, Indiana, somebody in Indiana recently said sort of like, whoa, like you guys are already getting subsidies from Chicago. Like, why would Indiana take you on? You think Indiana's going to send you extra money? Oh, no. So, you know what?
And Joan, too, finally, ignorance seems to be bliss. The more you're ignorant, the more that they stay in power. So, I don't believe there's a lot of us that want to be willfully ignorant. We just need to be educated. And the way time flies, when you can do your podcast and label it, this week's bill identification process, is this, or, whatever. It's almost like setting up those courses they sell on infomercials. Each, podcast has, information on how each state connects to another via the taxes.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're all
I like those ideas, Cindy. We're going to have to noodle around with that and see how we can get something like that off the ground. Great idea. Thank you for the call. Really appreciate it.
Because sure. I enjoy you and you educate good anyway, so thank you.
Well, thank you. You're very kind.
Bye-bye.
By the way, for those who texted in that I should explain a down ballot race, we are always talking about how important the top of a ticket is, which means the most important race or the biggest race on any ballot, which in a presidential election year would be the presidential race. In a midterm election year would probably be the congressional people and whichever senators were up for re-election. And any other race is considered. Remember when back in the day when there were paper ballots, the big races, the big races were on the top and the rest of them were below it, down ballot. So if you were voting for a county measure or a local municipal measure, a village township measure, judges, any of those races were lower on the paper ballot than the races for Congress and Senate and President. Hence the term down ballot, even though with electronic balloting, it doesn't really have that same sense of up and down now, does it? Let's go to our good friend Dave from Hoffman Estates. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Joan. Real quick, I texted you about that what's old is new, tied in with what Mike Johnson talked about, but also looking at these old notes back then under that was when Kentucky's then Governor Matt Bevin's administration had cut dental and vision coverage for nearly 500,000 Kentuckians after his Medicaid overhaul plan was rejected in court. Apparently he wanted poor people to get jobs, keep their Medicaid benefits, and that program is from Trump's administration encouraging states to impose limits on the state and federal health insurance program for the poor and the disabled. And then, like I texted you about Michigan Governor Snyder with his, before he left, the way he was screwing them, and he wanted, 19 to 62-year-olds and everything to either get start in 2020. It was going to kick in that they'll have to show workforce engagement averaging 80 hours a month, such as a job, school, vocational training, internship, substance abuse treatment, or community service. And then Trump approved it in 2019. And then there were also 4 other states who already had a 20-hour-a-week work requirement.
And we have to be careful, Dave, because Republicans will give these sound bites and name these bills in ways that seem reasonable. Like in Illinois, Republicans put forth, when it came to abortion, the Parental Notification Act. Well, what a great thing. If a minor wants an abortion, they should be, getting their parents involved. They're a minor. They're supposed to need guidance. The only problem was, as reasonable as that sounded, people who were familiar with abortions and the data said young people do involve their parents unless they have a good reason not to. If they are, say, the victim of incest, if there are other reasons, like for religious reasons, they know their parents would throw them out of the house. The kids who were not confiding in their parents had good reasons not to. So this law that looked like it made a lot of sense really didn't. And when we talk about things like, there's got to be a work requirement for Medicaid, before you sign off on that, take a look at who is on Medicaid. This is, again, going back to Reagan with his idea that there were welfare queens. And maybe Reagan found one woman who was trying to skip the system. And how many others were there that legitimately needed the help? How many people who get Medicaid are in nursing homes, they can't work, are disabled? It is very difficult for a disabled person to get a job in our ableist society. How many people are chronically ill or in chronic pain? You look at who really is receiving these benefits before you decide that on a whim you should change the rules to get these benefits, and you should make it harder for people to get these benefits. Just know, if it's all a bunch of able-bodied 20-somethings, well then, okay, let's make a work requirement. But my guess is the majority of the people getting Medicaid benefits are incapable, certainly of working full-time, if indeed they can work at all.
Mm-hmm. No, I just found it ironic when Johnson was talking that today, and I dug into the old notes from 6 years ago, 5 years ago, and it's almost word for word. They just, blew the dust off the book.
Yeah.
And, trying to make it like it's their own new idea. But,
yeah.
So like I said, old is new again. So, but anywho, let me clear off in case you got another.
Thanks.
But thanks for taking the call, Joe.
Thank you, Dave. We've got to get to the news here. And when we come back from the news, we're going to have an interesting day today. In the 4 o'clock hour, I'm going to be talking with Bruce Rheins, the former deputy bureau chief for CBS News in Los Angeles. I haven't spoken to him for a while, and find out what's going on not only in California as they try to recover from those fires everywhere, but also get the take of what people think there of Gavin Newsom and the political situation. Anyway, time to get to the news. We'll be back with much more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Very pleased to welcome back Dr. John Murphy, a professor at the University of Illinois in the Department of Communication. His area of expertise is presidential rhetoric. He has also started a new Substack. John, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Joan?
Oh, it's Tuesday. Tuesday's always a hard day for me. But this isn't about me. This is about you. Does your Substack have a name?
You can just find it under my name, or sometimes I also use the term the oratorical animal from an old blog I used to run.
Ooh, the oratorical animal. I kind of like that.
It's a fun name, I think.
Why did you decide to start writing the Substack?
I felt I wanted to have some way to contribute regularly to public dialogue about speeches. And so the Substack really is just I try to do it weekly. It's a weekly column where I pick a speech and try to talk about why it's persuasive and how it works and whether that's for good or ill. And so in that way, I hope to bring my expertise to public affairs.
Okay. Well, I know that you have shared with me the Substack where you wrote about Angus King, who is the senator, the independent senator from Maine who caucuses with the Democrats. So give us an idea of what it was about Angus King, what speech he made, or something about him that drew you to him.
Angus King opposed the nomination of Russell Vought to be director of the Office of Management and Budget. And he did not do so because Vought was incompetent or, not able to do the job. He did so because Vought had repeatedly insisted that he was going to break the law, that the President of the United States had sole executive power over agencies which the President does not have power over. And as a result of that, Angus King asked his fellow senators, is there any red line? Is there any place where you will draw a line and say the Constitution matters? And he did so in this most conservative way. He began with their oath of office. He talked about what the Constitution says. He made very careful deductive, that is, from the top arguments that said, if you believe in your oath, then you should vote against him. If you believe in the Constitution, you should vote against him. If, as a conservative, you believe in the original intent of the Constitution, you should vote against him. When a cabinet nominee makes an announcement that he is likely to violate the law, you should probably vote against him. And I just thought it was a fascinating speech in the sense that he used very conservative arguments in form, in structure, in premise, in order to urge the rejection of a nominee of the Trump administration.
Well, maybe I'm being harsh here, isn't one of the ways we judge political rhetoric whether or not it has the intended effect? Mr. Vogt did get seated. So was this good rhetoric or not?
Yeah, and that's sort of where I came down at the end of the piece. because my concern that came out of this, and I guess concern is too soft a word, my big worry that comes out of this is that if arguments like this do not persuade Republicans in the Senate, and these were really well done by a long-term 80-year-old white guy who's a veteran of the Senate, if this guy and this argument do not persuade them to stand up to Trump, I am not sure what will. And that's what deeply concerns me. I don't know where you go from here, given the kinds of arguments that Senator King so very effectively made.
I agree with that. And it seems to me that in their, I don't know if it's, their fealty to Trump or their fear that between Donald Trump's anger and Elon Musk's money, that they literally put their job on the line if they express any kind of resistance or opposition. Do you think, some people have speculated that possibly after the midterm elections, when Donald Trump is really a lame duck, that the Republicans in the Congress and in the Senate might possibly find it in themselves to not agree with everything and to actually stand up for some things when their political lives are not as quite on the line as perhaps they are right now?
I'd like to have that hope. I would. But the New York Times did a wonderful story, I think, last week on the North Carolina Senator Tom Tillis, who very correctly assessed that Pete Hegseth was not qualified to be the Secretary of Defense, and made it pretty clear that he intended to work against the confirmation of Secretary Hegseth. And as we know, he was confirmed, and Tillis voted for him. And the Times did a deep dive and pretty much identified the two factors you just did, that if Donald Trump attacks you, that badly hurts you in a Republican primary, and then Elon Musk throws millions of dollars to one of your opponents in a Republican primary, and you lose your seat. And that is what most of these senators seem to be facing at this point. And Tillis, as it turned out, never uttered a public word against him while furiously lobbying behind the scenes to try to stop Hegseth. So, when you are afraid to speak in
by
public,
all accounts, that was reported afterwards. Donald Trump called him up and threatened him. Joni Ernst, the Republican from Iowa, did not like Pete Hegseth and supposedly was threatened that Elon Musk would start funding a big negative ad campaign about her. I guess, I don't expect every single person to be willing to put their job on the line for what they believe in, but I guess I thought somebody would stand up. Tillis promised. Hegseth's the woman who knew his former wife and was going to talk publicly about the abuse. Tillis said, if you come forward and make this public, I will vote against his nomination. And then he didn't.
Yes. And the one who disappoints me the most is Senator Ernst, because she was in a situation where even if Trump threatens her and Musk starts dumping in money against her, it's a difficult pull for them. She's from a small state. It's thoroughly red now. She is well known in that state. She has many political allies. It's difficult for an outsider to go into Iowa and tell them who to vote for. And I think Ernst very much had an opportunity to speak up, and she would have provided cover for other senators. And even if Musk dumps a bunch of money into Iowa, Iowans may just end up resenting that and not following that. I remember back in the day, I lived in North Dakota in the early 90s when Bill Clinton was president. And all three members then of North Dakota's congressional delegation, 2 senators and the representative, were all Democrats. And Clinton said it was because they could sit down in that state and explain to individual constituents why they voted the way they voted. And I think the same was true for Senator Ernst in Iowa. that she could have sat down and been able to weather whatever campaign they would launch against her, and she chose not to do so. Senator Tillis is in a much more precarious situation. But Senator Ernst could have survived this. Iowans re-elected an 80-some-year-old Charles Grassley. They like somebody.
They're loyal.
Keep electing him.
Yeah. Dr. John Murphy is a professor at the University of Illinois in the Department of Communication. We are going to take a break and be back with more right after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
John Murphy specializes in rhetoric of the presidency and politics. He is a professor at the University of Illinois in the Department of Communication. John, I don't know if you were able to see, I saw some video on CNN today. The White House and some representatives from Russia are sitting down, attempting to negotiate some sort of peace settlement for the war in Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine isn't there. Marco Rubio, I saw in the picture, he's there, but Zelensky or anybody representing Ukraine didn't seem to be in that room. Do we expect a country to just acquiesce to any deal that Marco Rubio and the Russians work out?
This is going to be interesting because the president and Secretary Rubio clearly expect Ukraine to simply acquiesce to any deal. And they've made a terrible proposal in which they essentially asked to control virtually all of the mining in Ukraine in exchange for almost nothing.
Oh, John, Donald Trump only asked for 50% of all the output of all the mines in Ukraine that mine these rare elements. Just 50%? Come on.
I stand corrected.
All right, then.
So it's, there's... You got these people. And so they clearly expect that Ukraine, and to a larger extent, Europe itself, the continent of Europe, will simply fall into line. There are signs that this is not going to happen. The Prime Minister of Great Britain has already indicated that he is willing to deploy troops to Ukrainian territory in order to enforce any kind of peace agreement, and I expect other European countries, particularly Poland, are liable to follow suit. But in a larger, more public debate sense, this is one issue. We were just talking before the break on Republican senators standing up. This is one issue in which there still seems to be a Reaganite streak in the Republican Party, in which they are simply not going to acquiesce to a Munich agreement that sells out Ukraine much as the British sold out Czechoslovakia before the Second World War. Senator Wicker of Mississippi put in an announcement that, the Secretary of Defense had made a rookie mistake when he went to Europe and started talking about settling Ukraine without the help of Ukrainians or without the input of Ukrainians.
Ooh, that's pretty harsh. Rookie
that is
mistake.
Pretty harsh. Yeah, he laid it on Hegseth. There is clearly no respect for Secretary Hegseth among any members of the Senate.
I'm shocked by that. Shocked, I tell you.
Yeah, he's about as popular. Oh, and by the way,
did you see the picture coming out of what was apparently coming out of one of the meetings in Europe? Hegseth sitting there with what appeared to be a glass of dark amber liquid in front of him. Remember Pete Hegseth? Yeah, I know I've got a drinking problem, but if you give me this job, I'm not going to drink anymore, Hegseth.
Yeah, this is... Can you imagine what a cabinet meeting looks like in this White House?
Oh my God.
So I think there's going to be significant opposition within the Republican Party to any agreement that sells out Ukraine, and that at least a few senators, including McConnell, Wicker, and some others, are willing to go public on that. And then you could get quite an interesting debate on the Senate floor and elsewhere. And it's almost undoubted that Congress will have to appropriate money for any kind of an agreement, and so they'll have some pull here. So I'm very interested to see how this turns out, because this could be a public internal dispute in which you get a direct confrontation between the isolationist wing of the party and the old Reaganite conservative Cold War wing of the party.
Well, I don't know if this was indicative of how he really feels, but I remember when Volodymyr Zelensky came to the United States and met with Mike Johnson afterwards, Mike Johnson came out of that and he was like, we absolutely need to support Ukraine. We've got to get these funds going. I haven't heard much from Mike Johnson recently, and he doesn't seem to be a particularly brave man. So maybe we won't hear anything from Mike Johnson. But there was, even at the far-right levels, there was still support for Ukraine. Donald Trump, though, seems to be under the impression, perhaps because they've done it so far, that the Republicans will simply fall in line because they've done it with everything else he's asked for so far.
Yeah, and the difficulty, the Senate's going to have a number of senators, I think, who will not be happy selling out Ukraine. The House, they won't have as many, but the thing is the margins in the House are so small. It doesn't take but 5 or 6 representatives, and Mike Johnson can't pass anything. That's the major reason why Congress has done nothing so far. They've literally done nothing. We're now going on, a month? A little over a month, and they've done nothing. And the reason for that is they just can't herd everybody together to do stuff because the margins in the House are surpassingly small. I think it's right now because of representatives going into Trump's cabinet and so forth and so on. There's maybe a 2 to 3 vote margin that Mike Johnson has to get anything through. And it's almost impossible to, even Democrats would have a hard time herding a 2 to 3 vote margin. Much less the dysfunctional Republican Party. So how far they get with this, I don't know. I mean, and they're going to put all their loyalty chips into the budget. There is not going to be a hard whip to try to follow Trump on Ukraine. They want tax cuts. That's their number one priority. The Republican Party exists to provide tax cuts to rich people.
Exactly.
That's the whole reason for being. And so this other stuff is not going to be as important to them.
Regardless of whether or not we continue to support Ukraine, with the election of Donald Trump, the feeling that seems to have been coming out of Western Europe and the United Kingdom is we can no longer rely on the United States. I mean, supposedly, remember when Joe Biden went back to a NATO meeting and he said something like, the America's back, and somebody muttered, yes, but for how long? The feeling seems to be that we are now, as far as they're concerned, out of the picture. There was even some talk a while back that maybe Europe would put together its own military force, not as Germany or France, but as a European military force. What do you see with Donald Trump's election, with his hesitant support of Ukraine or his blackmail of Ukraine for support? What are the larger implications of this?
I think U.S. credibility is going to be at a low for decades. The Europeans and others around the world, for that matter, were willing to consider that one time was a mistake, that Donald Trump was initially an accident of our electoral college, that he did not receive a majority of the popular vote in 2016, and then in 2020 he was voted out. So at that point you could say this was an anomaly, this was a mistake, the American people do not intend to support this kind of thing. But his most recent election means that we are. And as a result of that, Europeans are no longer willing to trust the United States as they did before. And so I think it more likely that they will try to form at least some kind of a tripwire force, some kind of force that will be strong enough to deter Russia's, what are by now pretty shattered land forces, from expanding any further, and that Poland, France, and Germany in particular and perhaps Great Britain, although their budget situation is terrible. But Poland, France, and Germany in particular will begin to develop defense structures outside of NATO because they are not sure they can trust the United States in NATO.
Do you agree?
That would be an extraordinary loss for the United States.
Well, it's already happened. I can't imagine that they would trust us anytime soon. Do you believe, as some people do, that one of the pitfalls of trying to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war, if it isn't something that Ukraine signs on to, or perhaps even if it does, if Ukraine is ceding a large amount of territory, the fear is that just like in World War II, that this will not be the end of it, that, the people of Moldova, hey, they look like they should be Russians. Let's go there next. That Vladimir Putin will not be satisfied.
Oh, I agree. I think Putin's justification for what he has done in Ukraine and for what he is threatening elsewhere is that where there are Russian-speaking peoples, they are Russian. And so as a result, he has threatened the 3 Baltic states, he has threatened Moldova, he has threatened, to bring into his orbit a variety of other countries. At this point, his military has suffered so much and his economy is such a wreck that I think he would need to take a break and retool before he could think about doing anything else. And how long he lives is an open question. But at least in theory, I think that would simply be an invitation to further expansion on his part if he got what he wanted out of Ukraine. And it's more disturbing that the United States has our vice president going to Europe and praising the neo-Nazi party in Germany, aligning himself with Putin, claiming that the Europeans do not support free speech, the Secretary of Defense claiming that no U.S. forces will participate in any kind of a guarantee of Ukraine. All of these actions, as somebody who studies rhetoric, it becomes very clear they have already given away the store. They have already destroyed any chance of a meaningful negotiation over Ukraine because they've given Putin ahead of time what he wants. Yeah. It's like going to a used car dealership and saying, I have $5,000 in my pocket. Well, how much do you think the car's going to cost?
Yep. John Murphy is a professor at the University of Illinois. We are going to continue our analysis of the politics we're living in right now when we come right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And with me is Dr. John Murphy, professor at the University of Illinois Department of Communication. He just started a Substack that you can find by putting his name, John Murphy, into your Substack search bar, and it will pop up. I would love to talk more about Europe and Ukraine, but there are so many other things that I wanted to talk to you about. You are an expert in communication. There was recently a White House press opportunity in the West Wing. Donald Trump behind the Resolute desk, to his right, bouncing around his best buddy Elon Musk and Elon's son, who, for lack of a better name, I will refer to as Booger Boy. What did that communicate to the country?
First, it communicated that Elon Musk is president of the United States. Nobody acts like that in the Oval Office. If you were ever a fan of the fictional show The West Wing, there's a famous scene where Martin Sheen says, nobody sits down when the president stands up in the White House. Elon Musk wore a T-shirt. His kid was swearing at Trump. They were both bouncing around the room. Trump was staring vacantly off into space while sitting at the desk. None of it made any sense if you believe that Donald Trump is the president of the United States. It was bizarre. It was a bizarre circumstance, and it sent the message that at minimum authority is diluted and we don't quite know who's truly in charge of the country. I understand what the Trump administration is trying to do. They know that Donald Trump even now has a stature gap, so they are seeking to put him into the Oval Office as often as possible to bring the press in there regularly, as a contrast to Joe Biden, who did not necessarily talk to the press. He just did his job. And so they want to show Trump in the Oval Office doing the work. The difficulty is when you put Elon Musk in there with him, it's Elon Musk in the Oval Office doing the work. And nobody elected Elon Musk.
Nobody elected Elon Musk. I agree with that completely. It almost seemed to me, because I agree with you. To me, I mean, Musk was, being very musky. His kid not only told Donald Trump to shush up, but people who have recorded the audio and listened to it, at one point, apparently Musk's kid looked at Donald Trump and said, "You're not the president." And Donald Trump just sat there. He didn't seem engaged. He wasn't looking at the press. He wasn't looking at Musk. He was sort of just staring off, and he seemed exhausted or just like he was a million miles away. Is anybody looking at the replay of that? Is Donald Trump aware of the communication that took place that day? Because, he's a narcissist and wants to be the biggest, most important, most well-loved, smartest man in any room he's in. And he didn't come off like that. I don't know. Is even Donald Trump afraid of Elon Musk's money and what it could do? I cannot for the life of me figure out why Donald Trump was so utterly subservient and lifeless in that particular press conference.
It's been an odd start to the administration, and odd is an understatement, of course. But what's fascinating is that Trump apparently seems quite active in terms of pursuing retribution against those he does not like, sending out orders and making sure that anybody who participated in a prosecution of him gets fired. Those kinds of things seem to excite him greatly. Culture war seems to excite the administration as a whole. They are certainly trying to root out any hint that black people can serve in their administration effectively. But beyond that, I mean, again, the number one piece of legislation this administration will sign off on is the budget. Congress, they will enshrine their priorities in terms of how we spend money, and presently the House and the Senate are both working on initial budget resolutions. And by all accounts, the White House is simply not a part of this. They are not having input in it. They are not participating in the budget document. I don't know what the Office of Management and Budget is doing besides firing people. But this is the point in a presidency where Donald Trump would go before a joint session of Congress and give a major speech explaining his budgetary priorities and how he will locate money for, he'll use tariffs to raise money for enforcement, and then he'll cut individual income taxes because these beautiful tariffs will raise so much money, and then go on a nationwide tour to bump up support for his budget document. None of that seems to be being planned. None of that seems likely to happen. Trump is not the center of the administration's communication strategy. I don't know. It's bizarre. There's a great big hole at the middle of the administration, and Elon Musk is filling it. And, all they're doing is running around hurting people, even hurting their own constituents.
Yes. That's the part that's starting to come to light now. The fact that that the University of Alabama is getting a big part of its funding cut. It's the number one employer in the state. The fact that Kansas state farmers are in deep doo-doo because USAID bought so much of their crops. And this is the tip of the iceberg. We see representatives of Venezuelans in South Florida screaming in front of the cameras that Republicans lied to them when they said that these documented immigrants from Venezuela would be protected. I mean, it's just like there's a part of me that wants to say sort of an I told you so, like Did you not understand what was happening? And then there's a part of me that's like, this is the world we live in now.
Yeah, I've had talks with friends. I mean, about this very issue. That is, what do you do with all these people who've suddenly realized he wasn't kidding, that he really is going to, like, take government out of your life in some very serious ways? And your kid will not get the special education plans that you had hoped for, and that you believed is their due. Or that, that contract you signed with the Department of Agriculture, if you're a farmer, that would preserve the wetlands on your farm, and you get a bunch of money for that, and you fronted all the money to create that wetland, you're not going to get it back. And so part of me wants to go, yeah, see, this is the way this guy is. I'm really sorry this happened to you. Welcome to the fight. And the other part of me just wants to, like, metaphorically slap him upside the head and say, he said he was going to do this. And so I find myself torn about that issue.
I do too. And there's a school of thought that says, well, this is what people voted for. The best thing Democrats can do is just sit back and let everybody feel the pain. And then it'll be like, now are you ready to vote for a Democrat? Now that, your life has come apart like this, now that you realize that you were lied to, that you were misled, that you didn't do your homework? I don't know. I understand exactly what you're saying, because I'm torn by the same thing every day. I mean, I've started saying, when I'm talking about some of the damage that these cuts and layoffs and firings are doing, especially in the red states or even in blue states, but the red areas, like Illinois farmers. I mean, do they not remember how devastated they were last time Trump was in office and China decided not to buy their soybeans anymore? And my catchphrase has begun, how's that working out for you? How's that working out for you? And, I don't want poor people.
Insidious thing. The scariest and insidious thing is that they are simply deconstructing our medical research establishment. We're not going to see the negative effects of that for a while, not until the next pandemic or the cancer study that doesn't get done or the Alzheimer's cure that doesn't get found. But they are destroying the NIH, they are destroying the CDC, they are destroying medical research at universities across the country. I mean, the United States over the decades has developed a system of research in which our universities do the vast majority of basic research. That's different from other countries that have dedicated centers to research. We instead have decided to do it through our universities. And when they go after universities because they think we're woke, what they're doing is destroying the centers of basic research. The University of Illinois gave the world the web browser. And if you come after the University of Illinois, you are destroying the next innovation like that. And that's what does such awful damage to the economy and to our health in the long run.
Do you think that people are having any amount of buyer's remorse yet over their vote for Trump?
I don't think it's sunk in yet. It's only been a month or so, and most people do not pay attention the way we pay attention. And there's been this sort of fire hose of executive orders, and they can get all mixed up together. I think it's starting to penetrate in terms of the people who are losing their jobs. And so even in our local conservative paper here in Champaign-Urbana today, there was an op-ed by a guy who's been fired. And he couldn't believe it. And he announced he had voted for Trump. And he got fired from his job, even though he's a military veteran, simply because he was in his first year of employment in this job. And I think more and more of those stories are going to come out, and people will start to figure out, hey, this isn't working. But I think the big turning point will come when the Republican Congress finally releases what they're going to do to the budget, which is to really go after Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid in return for tax cuts to the rich. And at that point, Democrats need to go after them exactly the way Clinton did. They are cutting your Social Security in order to give Elon Musk a giant tax cut. And at that point, I think the buyer's remorse will truly set in. At least I hope so.
I am talking with Dr. John Murphy from the University of Illinois, an expert in rhetoric. And when we come back, I want to look at what you just said about how Bill Clinton came out and delivered a message that was very effective when Republicans were pulling some junk like this before. Everyone is saying that there doesn't seem to be anybody stepping forward to save us or lead us from the Democratic Party. And, what should the message be? I want to talk to you about, first of all, when you referenced Bill Clinton, what did he, when we come back, talk about what he did or said that was particularly effective and whether or not that's something we could do now. Dr. Murphy and I will be right back after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
Joining me is Dr. John Murphy, professor at the University of Illinois in the Department of Communication. He's an expert on rhetoric, presidency rhetoric, political rhetoric. And he just made reference to the fact that Bill Clinton came out swinging when Republicans wanted to cut social programs for people. What did Bill Clinton do or say, John, that was so effective?
Bill Clinton was one of the great counterpunchers in American rhetorical history, and he was helped enormously by the fact that the Republicans just walked right into him. They fell into a trap. They announced a budget that had millions and hundreds of millions of dollars of cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, and they made their tax cut almost exactly the same size as that. So as a result, Clinton could just point to the absolute correspondence between these two numbers and say, look, they're cutting your dad's Social Security in order to fund tax cuts for rich people. And so Clinton, was very good at explaining government funding. He was very good at explaining government numbers in ways people can understand. He's always been that way. We've seen him in campaigns since then doing the same thing. And so his capacity to take abstract numbers and make them concrete, to put them in terms of people's lives and lives lost and lives affected, was unparalleled in contemporary political history.
Also, I wanted to, along the lines of Bill Clinton, some people are saying, why aren't we hearing from Obama? Why aren't we hearing from Bill Clinton? Why aren't they out front and center? And then other people have told me, well, it's not their place. Former presidents don't usually, go out there and rag on current presidents. What's your take on that?
Former presidents usually don't. And I think their influence is limited. At this point, I've got to say, I also think Bill Clinton has had some health problems. He suffered a bad case of flu that put him in the hospital. I think he probably overexerted himself in the campaign. So I'm sort of forgiving of Bill Clinton at this point. Barack Obama, he just has not wanted to participate in politics since he left office. I mean, he will come out quadrennially for the campaign, but in between times he wishes to rise above politics. And I have to be truthful, that annoys me a little bit. I wish he would take more of a leadership role and be able to do so. I think the Democrats are going to have to move, in the old classic cliche, to a new generation of leadership coming out of Congress and coming out of the states. And again, this will probably have to wait until the budget document comes into focus. And I understand fully why people are angry right now, but I suspect that there's just been such a flurry of executive orders and this, that, and the other thing that nobody's got a clear handle on what's happening. But the budget document will give you that clear handle. And at that point, I would be deeply disappointed if the Democrats didn't come out, really hitting hard. And
I'm deeply disappointed on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, and at the forefront, I expect you would see Senator Amy Klobuchar. You're likely to see Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania. Our governor, J.B. Pritzker, has put out a couple of pretty funny videos making fun of Trump and going after him. I think the California wildfires have neutralized Gavin Newsom. He's afraid.
I think so, too. I think he's got so much on his plate right now that he's just not paying attention and being a part of the national stage. But I think it's completely understandable He's got a lot to accomplish because there's a lot of fears that, developers will sweep in, and a lot of the middle class folks who got burned out or are not going to have the money to rebuild. There are insurance problems. I mean, we'll give him a pass for now.
Yeah, I think so. Plus, he's got an Olympics coming up. He's got a major World Soccer tournament, I think, coming up. So Los Angeles is going to need everybody's attention in the state of California. So I suspect California office holders are not going to be at the forefront of what we're looking at.
Also, Gulf of America. What is the rhetorical point of declaring the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America and then being so crabby about it that you won't let an Associated Press reporter into a briefing because the Associated Press continues to call it the Gulf of Mexico?
This is a classic authoritarian rhetorical move. You say something absolutely ridiculous only because you want people to bend the knee, to respond in the way you wish them to respond. And so Trump can use it as a loyalty test. If you say Gulf of Mexico, then you're not on his team. It's an easy dividing mark. Similarly, he can repeatedly refer to Canada as the 51st state and call Prime Minister Trudeau Governor Trudeau and expects his loyal courtiers around him to do the same. When he does stuff like this, Greenland, Canada, whatever, it's because he wants to establish a reality in which you have to say the most ridiculous things and you're willing to do so. That's what authoritarians do. And so in today's New York Times, we saw Peter Baker writing a serious column as if it were possible for the United States to take over Canada and what the electoral implications of that would be. That is the ultimate in access journalism. Baker knows now he can get into the White House because he's actually treated Trump's proposal seriously. That's the rhetorical effect of that kind of thing.
And what about the media organization that allowed him to do that?
I mean, some of the media, it's been fascinating to watch. On the one hand, the New York Times recently has suddenly discovered that Donald Trump is truly a danger to the Republic, and that's nice. It would have been better 6 months ago, but it's nice. On the other hand, they still have individual writers and columnists like Maggie Haberman and Peter Baker who are practicing classic access journalism and so have to treat Trump seriously. The sane washing is still going on, even in the face of the fact that some of these events are just absolutely ludicrous. And at some point, more people have to say, these are ludicrous ideas. They are only there to make you show loyalty. This is a ludicrous press conference with Elon Musk in the Oval Office. People don't do this. This is not how the President of the United States should operate. He is ceding his power to an unelected billionaire. I mean, that's facts. That's not opinion. That's actually what's happening. And so the sane washing continues, and that's the most worrisome thing. Are they so worried about Donald Trump's anger and retaliation? I mean, Google Maps capitulated pretty early on. If you pull up, and if you use the Google search engine and you pull up Gulf of Mexico, it'll say the whole content of the page, at least when I pulled it up last time, the content of the page still referred to the Gulf of Mexico, but the title of the page was Gulf of America. I mean, come on. You hate to say people are just subject to the blunt instrument of coercion, but that seems to be what's happening. ABC came to a settlement with Trump where they paid millions of dollars into his pockets for no reason whatsoever. He had filed a frivolous lawsuit against them, and so they paid it off. CBS seems on the verge of doing the same thing, as I understand it. Everybody's got to contribute to the Trump coffers. Nobody's reporting on any personal corruption. Trump's little bitcoins and things like that, which are simply a way to bribe him. If you invest in them, he makes money, and so you can let him know that you've bribed him. And appropriate stuff will follow, presumably. None of that is really being covered because apparently they're just simply afraid that the Justice Department will come after them. And that's partly because many of these institutions are owned by major corporations who are seeking mergers, who are worried about the Justice Department ruling yay or nay on their mergers, or investigating their taxes, or doing this, that, or the other thing to them. It's really appalling. And it's the result of an era of corporatizing our media such that we don't have independent, freestanding news organizations anymore. They're always part of a larger corporate structure, and those corporate structures are beholden.
See, that's what I think it is. I think that you have these conglomerates, and why does Jeff Bezos not want the Washington Post to endorse Kamala Harris? Oh, because he wants a contract for his space company, Blue Origin. And when you've got these big conglomerates, it's really difficult for subsidiary A to take a stand when subsidiary B and C might suffer for it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the Washington Post canceled an anti-Elon Musk ad without explanation the other day. They just wouldn't run it.
One that they had already accepted.
Mm-hmm. It was going to be a wraparound where it would cover the outsides of the newspaper. I've got to say, those kinds of ads really annoy me when I get a newspaper. So,
but I do admire who's ever willing to spend that kind of money just to say what they think. You know,
absolutely.
Ooh, you spent a lot of money for that full page ad. Good for you.
So but, you know, they wouldn't provide an explanation because obviously they couldn't. The explanation would have been, our owner says we can't run it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, circling back around to the government employees who are in danger right now, I still subscribe to the Washington Post. I'm hopeful every day the former tech reporter Kara Swisher can put together a group to buy it. But one of the things that I read is the restaurant reviewer who does a live on-air, online chat every Wednesday. And it's a really interesting barometer of what's going on in the world, because before people were like, well, this will be the last time I write to you on this chat because I've canceled my subscription because of, you know, what your paper's doing. And then now I'm getting, you know, well, we just want you to know how much we enjoy reading about all the restaurants, though we're not going to be going out to restaurants anytime soon since we're worried about losing our jobs. That was like in the chat like 3 times. Well, you know, our restaurant budget is now zero. We're putting that money into savings because we don't know if we're going to be out of work. It's such an interesting barometer of where people are. And I know people say D.C. isn't like the rest of the country, but those government workers, even the ones that still have jobs, they're terrified. Everybody thinks that the axe is coming.
I mean, and these are the sorts of things that are concrete indications of how bad this is. And we need more and more of those stories. It's awful. It's sad. I mean, one of the things that could very well also focus a lot of minds is when everybody gets up and goes out to go to their vacations to the national parks in the summer and shows up at Yosemite and it's closed. Or there are parts of the park you can't go to because he's fired all of the staff. And you've spent years saving for this vacation, and Donald Trump has ended it for you.
Yep.
That sort of thing, I think, are concrete. Again, it's only a month into this. And these people are just now losing their jobs, and these services are just now ending. So when it really starts to sink in, when you find you can't go somewhere, as airplanes drop out of the sky once a week, it seems, as all of that keeps happening, I think the accumulation of that over time will have a significant effect on public opinion.
John, it is always a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here. John Murphy from the University of Illinois Communications Department. Thank you for your time and insights.
My pleasure. Thank you, Joan.
We're going to take a break for news. We're going to be back with more after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am very pleased to welcome back to our airwaves longtime newsman Bruce Rheins, currently retired from the Bureau of CBS News in Los Angeles, world traveler, television extra. He does it all. This is a Renaissance man. How are you, Bruce?
That's very impressive. Thank you. Wow.
Yeah. Who is that guy? He's somebody
Really?
I want to know.
Seriously. I got to check his Facebook page.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to first talk to you about California. I was just talking to Dr. John Murphy from the University of Illinois, and we were talking about, who are the Democratic voices. And, J.B. Pritzker has been out there. Gavin Newsom was out there, but he's been a little bit distracted by what's going on in your state. How are things there with the post-fire economy that you're all living in?
He's just trying to walk a very fine line because, to get this cleanup halfway done the way that Trump is insisting it can be done and everybody else wants it to be done, we will need some federal help. And, Trump is very obvious, acts on a very churlish manner and then transactional. So he's trying to walk a very fine line. I think that once things calm down a little bit here, I think the resistance part of California will rise up again. But right now, I think understandably, everybody's focused on the not only the wildfire recovery, but there was massive flooding and everything up in the north part of the state. So we've got some natural disasters that we have to deal with, and we need the cooperation of the federal government. And I think Gavin is trying to walk a kind of a fine line and maybe tamp down his criticism for now.
Yeah, I know that rebuilding is the big issue now in the Los Angeles area. Over the weekend, the Wall Street Journal did an article that I'm going to reduce down to a couple of sentences, and it was to get the rebuilding underway in a timely fashion, that a lot of the environmental impact studies and all kinds of other hoops that people had to jump through, that those are all going to be either reduced or done away with completely. And their argument was, why not make it permanent? And, they traced the history of this to, rich people developing enclaves, and suddenly someone wants to build an apartment building. And it's like, oh, no, we don't. As one of the people in California who first used zoning in the Berkeley area did to prevent a building like that, we don't want those shiftless, transient renter people in our neighborhood. What do you think? Are the building regulations too onerous in California? Should they be dismissed on a permanent basis?
I think they'll never be dismissed on a permanent basis. I think, and even here today, once the initial shock of the fires passed after a couple of weeks, then environmental groups here have been very strong in trying to enforce as many of the environmental laws that can be enforced within reason. And also, there's now here a big argument with where all the toxic waste and the debris from these fires is going to be stored. There are some certain designated areas out kind of further east of Los Angeles, and the residents around there are very upset that all this toxic waste, which includes asbestos and things like that, is going to be kind of stored there for an indefinite time. So I think the environmental I think everybody did talk about, things are going to be relaxed, and Mayor Bass made a thing about we're going to streamline permitting and things like that. But it's a big bureaucracy. I don't know that things can be actually streamlined very fast, especially we have a very, as you might imagine, a very vocal pro-environment coalition here in California, and they want to make sure that things are done correctly. You know, to the point where nobody knows now what's going to happen along the coastline, where a lot of buildings and homes were lost that were right along the coast of Pacific Palisades and Malibu. Some people are saying we should leave it. There should never be any rebuilding there again. Leave the coastline empty. Other people say, well, it was property that people lost, and they have to be remunerated. So it's It's a very,
I mean, that whole stretch of real fancy homes in Malibu is, you know, it looked like a nuclear bomb went off after everything moved through. And, you know, I can understand, well, you know, let's just get rid of it and open up the beach. But if I were one of those people who owned a $15 million oceanfront Malibu house, I don't think I would be very happy with that idea. Oh, yes, just donate it for the greater good, Joan.
Yeah, next fire, when the fire moves up further up the coast, where you have the Malibu Lagoon and Malibu Colony homes, which are really, that's where, you know, where most of where the stars live and everything, and you know, those are multi-million-dollar homes. You know, they're susceptible to the next fire, just as the rest of that area is.
So I had forgotten about that. I saw one strip of oceanfront property where they had just been decimated. And back when, you know, things were still more fresh, reading that even though the fires were out, people were not being allowed to come back to their homes because it was toxic. This wasn't just a forest fire where it was wood burning. I mean, these were plastics and electronics, and as you pointed out, insulation. What is going to happen to all that toxic material temporarily and long term? Does anybody know?
President Trump seems to think that this can be done in a month. The debris removal can be done in a month. But you're talking about just in the Malibu area, the Pacific Palisades area, 6,000 homes, and then in the Altadena area, another 3,000. It's a monumental task to remove that carefully and safely. And then, as I said, there's some designated dump areas out further east in California, further east in Los Angeles County, that are normal designated areas for debris removal to store the stuff. But people there are really upset about the sheer volume that is coming in there, and there's been like some very angry protests and city council meetings of the towns out there.
Wow, yeah, and sort of not in my backyard, buddy. I don't want to. I mean, here in Illinois, we've had protests because of businesses that cause dust in the neighborhood, let alone anything as toxic as this. Would you say
people think that, thank goodness the fires are out, and we lost a lot of lives, but it could have been much, much worse, and then people are kind of getting on with their lives. But there is going to be months and really years of dealing with what happened in this area. It's kind of unprecedented. We've had wildfires in California that have destroyed a lot of areas. Paradise lost up in the northern part of the state was wiped out a few years ago. And they've rebuilt. It has taken them years to rebuild. But that was in a remote location. It's nothing like being in a urban location like Altadena and the Pacific Palisades.
And I know there was also some concern that, especially like in Altadena, a lot of the people who lived there were working class folks. And, somebody on one of the early reports said, a fear is that especially with the insurance problems that have been experienced by people in California, what if these people can't afford to rebuild? Does that mean that developers are going to come in and scoop up all this property for pennies on the dollar? I mean, it is a multi-layered mess, isn't it?
Yeah. There are very big protests that have been happening over the past week out in Altadena from residents there, saying hands off Altadena, directed toward developers coming in. But, it's you have to weigh that against the needs of maybe an elderly couple that's lived there for years. Their house is burned down. They don't want to wait for 5 years to get through the insurance process and for the house to be rebuilt. So you have to weigh what they want against what the rest of the residents want. They don't want houses to be built that are too modern or that don't fit in with the character that the neighborhood was before. But there's some people who have legitimate reasons to just kind of say, I'd like to walk away and try to start anew something else and get what I can, especially the way insurance companies act when you're trying to deal with them remunerating you for a complete loss like that.
And I'm of two minds as what this will do to Gavin Newsom's political future. On the one hand, he's got so much to deal with, and it's going to take so long that it seems like it's really going to pull him off the national stage. But on the other hand, if this gets done right, if these various factions can be reasonably satisfied, if the rebuild can happen reasonably on time, if the toxic materials can be stored reasonably safely, this could potentially be a boon to his political career on the national stage. What do you think?
He's termed out. He leaves office in 2026, and it's going to be somebody else's job for a while. The things will not be done here by 2026, and he'll be free to to rest on whatever laurels he's able to garner there. And also, I think if we're talking about a national thing, I think people's memories are kind of short. And by 2028, are people going to remember exactly what happened in this fire and what Gavin Newsom did or did not do or was able to accomplish or not able to accomplish? It's a good question. Things change so quickly, and then it's actually a long time from now.
Yeah. Speaking of short-term memories, I want to talk to you about the short-term memory of our national electorate. We need to take a break, but former L.A. bureau chief for CBS News, Bruce Rheins, and I are going to be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I'm joined by former newsman Bruce Rheins, was deputy bureau chief for CBS News in Los Angeles. You just referred to the fact that a lot of voters have a very short memory, and that if Gavin Newsom decides he wants to make a run for president in 2028, how he handles the current post-fire crisis might not even be an issue. I want to talk about the memory or lack thereof of the entire electorate. I don't know if you heard this, Bruce. Stephen Colbert on The Late Show said that people had forgotten how much they disliked Donald Trump the first time around, but they were rapidly relearning that, and they would have to learn it once again. And that really kind of struck me as true, because before it was like, oh, my God, he's doing all this awful stuff. And this time it's, oh, my God, he's doing all this awful stuff, and I wasn't supposed to be a part of it, but somehow I am. I thought I would be excluded.
Yeah, I just read about a poll. I think it was can't remember which poll it was. Maybe the YouGov poll or something, where 70% of Americans think Donald Trump has fulfilled his promises. And I am one of the 70%. I think he's fulfilled his promises. I don't think it's a good thing, but that's they're trying. The Republican side is trying to spin that as like, oh, everybody likes him and all this stuff like that. He's fulfilled what he said he's going to do, and he always tells that story about you knew I was a snake when you took me in. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of people have forgotten just what a snake he was, and I don't know if COVID, the whole COVID thing, people's memories got murky or something like that. Okay,
well, let me give you one example that puzzles me. Early on in the election cycle, he's making a speech somewhere, and he said, how much he wants to thank the Heritage Foundation because they put together this outline for a new Trump administration, and it's going to be beautiful, and he's got this blueprint. And then the Project 2025 starts to get out there, and people are like, whoa, this isn't quite what we thought. And then he's like, well, I don't really know any of the people who wrote any of that stuff, even though many of them had actually been in his administration before. And then when it became more and more unpopular, he started saying, I don't even know what it is. I have nothing to do with it. And for anybody who was paying attention, okay, I think it's great. I don't know the people who wrote it. Oh, I don't know what it is. What is Project? Could you explain it to me? I would say that a politician who is capable of saying these three things is somebody who lies. I don't know. Call me crazy. Somebody who changes their stance based on public reaction isn't somebody who I can trust to tell me what they really think or what they really plan to do. And yet it was like, okay. No, Donald Trump doesn't even know about Project 2025. No, he's never read it. Nobody's ever talked to him about it. So it kind of feels to me like the people who voted for him in a nasty kind of a way, they kind of deserve what they're getting. Yeah.
And to that point, my wife and I were just talking before this segment. He's down in Mar-a-Lago now. He's doing all this stuff now from Florida, and what it is kind of a plausible deniability. I'm not in Washington. They're doing stuff. It's not me. The Washington people. If there's a blowback on something like that, you can plausibly blame what's happening in Washington, and he is blameless. They're not following his instructions or whatever. It's It's hard, for the mainstream media to keep pointing out things that he said that he's lying about. They're doing it, and finally, after a while, that becomes white noise. Yes, he lied on this, he lied on that. I don't know how you can get through if people aren't paying attention to mainstream media and they're just paying attention to Breitbart and Newsmax and Fox and things like that.
Do you think people are still paying attention to CBS News and ABC News and Lester Holt over at NBC News?
Not in a general way. There are certainly, there's certainly people who are still, interested in real news in America that are going to be, paying attention to the networks and to the major papers. But, it's not the people that you want to reach. So many people are just tuning out the news and not paying attention in any respect, and that's what's really frightening. And this whole thing with the AP being banned because they are not going along with what he says, it's this abrogation of all of the basic rights and values of America that is and nobody really in a broad way. There's protests, but nobody really in a broad way standing up for. To say, no, this is wrong. We have freedom of speech in America. The Associated Press is doing nothing wrong. They should not be banned from the White House press corps. But it's and I don't know how that can be rectified. I know there's a lot of discussions going on in the White House press corps. Should we boycott or do we go on? What do we do? And some people think it's not a good idea to boycott because then there will be no objective news coverage. So it's everything is happening so fast, it's hard to create a strategy to fight it,
Dick Kay once told me, for those of you who don't recognize the name, longtime 30-year political reporter in Chicago on television. Dick Kay once told me that in the early years of the Mayor Daley regime, that if Mayor Daley didn't like the question you asked him, he would move on to the next reporter. And Dick said that in the early days of the press corps, they had each other's backs. Like if I ask you, Bruce Rheins, well, yeah, but what about line 47 in your budget where you're cutting this? And, Mayor Daley would go, okay, well, I'm going to talk to Marianne Ahern. In the old days, Dick said, then Marianne Ahern would stand up and say, yeah, okay, well, I'm going to follow up on that. What about this line item that, you're trying to not talk about? And he said that the press corps was united. I mean, yes, they were competitors. Everybody had their own outlet. Everybody wanted their own scoops. But when a politician was in front of them and was either dissembling or refusing to answer a question, they would keep asking the question, person after person, until either the politician walked out or they got an answer. Is that like an old-timey, old-fashioned thing that we'll never see again, Bruce?
Yeah, I think that happened when I was in Chicago, and I would go to press conferences with Mayor Washington. And sometimes, I remember one time specifically where I asked this pretty tough question that he did not want on some issue he didn't want to get into, and they moved on, and then he went to other reporters, and they were saying, no, that's a story. What about that? And then finally, Alton Miller shut down the press conference, and then he came over and yelled at me. But it was. That's what used to happen. It does not happen in this press corps. Everybody's got their own idea of like what they want to ask, and also, now Trump or what's her name, Caroline Leavitt can just
angry blonde woman. On this show, we call her angry blonde woman.
Okay, I won't say her name anymore. She can pivot to. One of these Trump-friendly outlets that are just going to put up a softball, or like this thing today with Sean Hannity interviewing Trump and Musk together.
Are we ever going to see Trump with? Well, no. We have to take a break. I'm beginning to think that Elon Musk is more than the money behind the throne. I'm beginning to think that he's acting as some kind of caretaker for Donald Trump. Bruce Rheins is a longtime newsman, worked here in Chicago, retired as the deputy bureau chief for CBS News in Los Angeles. He and I are going to take a break, and we're going to solve the problems of the world and the United States when we come right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I'm joined by Bruce Rheins, longtime newsman here in Chicago, retired as the deputy bureau chief for CBS News in Los Angeles. Bruce, in these tumultuous, shall we say, times, how do you balance staying informed versus staying optimistic and in good mental health?
That is a really good question. Despite myself, I try to stay informed. I have watching all day, and I look at the news, and I look at the newspapers and everything like that, watch evening newscasts and things like that, and I get kind of frustrated about when I see them reporting on things, and then I'm reading on maybe certain newsletters or other more left-leaning outlets, things that are really happening and what deeper. So it's hard. It's hard. My only optimism is just take the long view. This country has gone through many, many, many crises over its history, and this is one of the biggest ones that we've ever had. But I think that it's going to resolve itself. It reminds me, and especially when I was listening to Ed Eisendrath and what he was saying on that promo you played, I was just reading James Carville, who I don't know how relevant he is anymore, but he had an interesting observation that with all these protests that are happening around the country, that Democratic politicians and elected officials should stay out of it, should get out of the way. Let them happen organically. Let it develop organically. And I think, and he thinks over time, over a few months, it's going to really become a juggernaut, that the people of America are going to realize this, including the people who voted for Trump, who are now losing their job in the federal government, and people, who voted for Trump who are on Medicaid, who are in danger of having all that cut. It's going to develop, and you have to kind of trust the American people are eventually going to come to their senses, but it's a very tumultuous time, as you said, right now.
Well, remember in his first term, toward the latter part of his first term, I remember there was a website, Republican Voters Against Trump, and it was all these videos that people made about why they supported Trump, why they voted for Trump, and why they've changed their mind and can no longer support him. And by the time his first term ended, there were tons, there were hundreds of these little videos on this website. And I think I agree with you that we have to take the long view. Something like that will happen again. I hope that at the very least, Democrats can regain the House in the upcoming midterms. But still, that's like 600 days away. I really hope that what you're talking about, the fact that the American people will most likely be disillusioned with him and what he's doing and will start to resist, I hope that happens because, we've seen instances where democracies slid into dictatorships, and part of what didn't happen was that the people didn't rise up and didn't take to the streets and didn't threaten their representatives with being, thrown out of office. So, but then again, I think to myself, but wait a minute, these are the people, Donald Trump didn't just win by accident, didn't just win because of a mistake in the Electoral College. He won the popular vote, in part because a lot of Democrats just sat home for whatever reason. And I really hope that we can light a fire under those people. I do agree with you that when we take to the streets and let our voices be heard en masse, it is very powerful. I just worry that that's not going to happen. I hope you're right, but I'm worried, Bruce.
Yeah, I just think, I agree with you, but I just think that, for instance, I think that the Democrats, have learned, hopefully, have learned a lesson. I think certainly in any new crop of candidates coming up in state houses or in congressional elections have learned that there are certain issues that are just non-starters for the American populace, as right as it is to stand up for transgender rights in all respects, maybe not emphasizing that at this point in our history is going to be the thing. I think that unfortunately, that's going to be something that's probably going to be taking a back seat in the next electoral cycles, and other cultural things. But I think the Democrats have got to learn that, they've got to reach voters. They're going to try to flip voters. They've got to reach them on their level and not on the admittedly ideal Democratic level. It would be great if everybody in this country could realize that transgender people are people and they deserve as much rights as anybody else, for example. But, it's going to be tough to make that argument again in the next one or two cycles. So, unfortunately, but that's what has to be done, I think, getting down to a more grassroots thing.
You have just echoed a sentiment that Tom Nichols wrote about in the Atlantic magazine, that if Democrats want to win, they can't be focused. They've got to focus on what wins elections. And maybe that means not giving every group the soundbite or the attention that they want, but focusing on the big issues that everybody agrees on. Not that you refute your beliefs, but, to great extent that one soundbite of Kamala Harris where she was saying, well, transgender people in prison should get all the treatment and surgery they need. And Tom Nichols' argument is that Kamala was pressured into making that statement by a group that was very left that supported this issue. And it's not that she was wrong, but that instead of focusing on pleasing every single group that calls themselves Democrat, let's take a step back. What are the positions and the issues that win elections? In other words, be a Democrat, but be a pragmatic Democrat. Is that heresy for me to say that, Bruce?
No, it is not. And that's what has to be done. And what else has to be done is what the right wing has done very successfully over the past 25 years is built a communications platform that gets their message out to their people. And the Democrats have got to figure out a way to have something equivalent to that. Now, there's this, this Midas podcast thing. I just saw it was number one. Now it's beating out Joe Rogan.
Really?
Yeah, it's the number one podcast right now. But which is a good start. But we need more things like that. We can't just depend on one thing. The right wings, they've got Fox and Breitbart and Newsmax and OAN and all that stuff like that, which is developed in this like organism unto itself. We need to do that, but to do that, we need to Democrats need to have a kind of a more of an agreement, a unified vision of what the message is, and not necessarily kowtow to every single issue that can possibly be talked about, especially on the cultural side.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that just as in the first Trump administration, it's going to be people pressuring their lawmakers, and suddenly some of those lawmakers who have been pretty invertebrate up till now will find a spine, and they will go forth and they will speak. And I am holding on to that hope, and I'm looking forward to those days. And I'm glad that you will be around to come on the radio and talk about them with me when we can say, oh, look at this wonderful movement, and isn't America great again?
Thanks to you and me and all the other Democrats in America.
Yes. Say hello to your lovely wife, Dawn, for me.
I will.
And tell her a belated happy birthday.
All right, thank you.
Bruce Rheins, longtime newsman, worked at NBC5 and ended up his career working in the Los Angeles bureau for CBS News. We are going to take a break. We're going to be back with Rich Eberwein right after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
We have the lovely and talented Rich Eberwein with us. He is a reporter for Heartland Signal, the digital cousin of WCPT Radio. Rich always brings to us stories that have been featured on Heartland Signal, stories we otherwise might have missed. Hey, Rich, how are you today?
I'm doing well today, Joan. How about yourself?
Oh, it's Tuesday. I'm groovy. What have you got for us today?
Okay, so today, so last week we wrote up a story about a U.S. representative named Rob Bresnahan. Last Friday, he went on Twitter and basically said that he will not vote for any budget plan that features cuts to benefits programs like Medicaid and SNAP, which are currently on the chopping block because of the current budget proposals coming out of the congressional Republicans. I think this is a significant story.
Just to be clear, Bresnahan is a Republican.
He's a Republican. He represents a swing district in Pennsylvania. So he's sort of one of a few different Republicans around the country right now kind of pushing back on these budget proposals, likely with re-election in mind in a couple of years, because it's almost as if cutting benefits programs is an unpopular idea among constituents.
Yeah. A little bit, and sometimes what happens with these people is that it takes one brave person to stand up and say, you know what, I'm not going along with that. And then suddenly other people realize that they don't want to go along with it either.
Yeah, it was a bit shocking, especially because Bresnahan kind of aligned himself with the, the MAGA agenda, America First agenda, when he was running for office. And this is a pretty staunch opposition to openly come out and say no cuts to benefits programs.
Wow.
Especially when, the congressional Republicans can only afford 2 representatives to defect in order to pass bills in the House of Representatives right now. They need universal support for stuff to get passed right now. And you kind of have the Senate Republicans going in a different direction than the congressional Republicans. And so it's kind of also highlighting the dysfunction right now that's going on in Washington. The Senate Republicans announced this week that they're voting on a different set of bills than the ones in the House of Representatives are. And in order to get stuff passed through the reconciliation process, they need to be voting on the same bill. So they need all of their ducks in a row. And Bresnahan and a group of others like Don Bacon from Nebraska, another representative in California named David Vallejo, these swing district Republicans are kind of pushing back and saying, maybe this isn't such a good idea if we want to keep hold of the House in 2 years. And, these Republicans represent districts that have high rates of adults that are on Medicaid and on SNAP. So these, cutting these benefits programs is going to have, likely have serious consequences on their re-elections in 2 years.
Wow. Well, this is going to be really interesting to follow since, let's see, what day is today? Today is the 18th of February. That gives us what? 1, 2, 3 weeks and some change before the government shuts down. So,
right.
Yeah. Thanks, Rich. What else you got?
Speaking of Washington, Elon Musk is cutting things left and right without congressional support or oversight. And at the same time, he's also purchasing TV ad time up in Wisconsin. We just put out a report today. He purchased over $650,000 worth of TV time to support Wisconsin Supreme Court candidate Brad Schimmel, who's the conservative running up there.
Oh, yeah, the very, very, very conservative running up there. Well, I wonder if the people of Wisconsin will get ticked off because, most people in a state don't like somebody from outside their state trying to tell them what to do. I wonder if that will be the reaction in Wisconsin when it becomes public knowledge that it's Elon trying to tell you what to do. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, it's curious because Schimmel was sort of one of those people saying things like that. Last month, Heartland Signal obtained some audio of Schimmel speaking at a meet and greet last July where he was rambling about the dangers of socialism because it leads to a few people collecting and hoarding money and power, and we have a clip of him talking about that.
If we let this go, it's gone. Mm-hmm. And you know what? To get it back, there has to be another bloody revolution because the socialists won't give it up. They won't walk away. And why on earth would these people be favoring socialism? Why? They know it won't work. We know the answer.
Power.
Follow the money. The money and the power, right? Mm-hmm. And because with socialism, there's a handful of people who have all the money and all the power and everybody else that's screwed.
Okay. Well, maybe he'll listen to himself.
Yeah, the consolidation of money and power is a problem when it doesn't benefit his own political gains.
There you go. That's the caveat we've been waiting for.
Yeah. And, it's not like this is just like Elon Musk's efforts could very well tip the scale in this election. Wisconsin is a very purple state.
Yeah.
2 years ago, the liberal candidate in the state Supreme Court race, Janet Protasevich, won by about 200,000 votes, but it was seen as a true toss-up for the entire time up until the end results came in. Trump himself only won the state by 30,000 votes. Tammy Baldwin won re-election by less than 40,000 votes. It's not an insignificant thing that Elon Musk is pouring this much money and likely even more as the race gets closer on April 1st.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're shining a light on this. That's the only thing we can do. And, the people of Wisconsin can decide for themselves. We don't mind Elon Musk buying himself an election, or we do.
Yeah, and it would effectively be buying the Republicans back into power. The conservatives would take back the Supreme Court in Wisconsin if Schimmel wins this race, and that could open up a path to implement gerrymandering again, which they just got rid of. So
yep.
It has a lot of consequences. And, Elon Musk was also on Twitter garnering, tens of millions of views on his posts, directly calling for people to vote Republican in this race. So very concerning.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks for keeping an eye on it. And I know that you've also been keeping an eye on some stuff going on in North Dakota. Tell me about that.
Yeah. There's a state representative up there who introduced a bill he was urging the Supreme Court to overturn the right to same-sex marriage, and we have a clip of him talking about that as well.
HCR 3013 urges the United States Supreme Court to reconsider its actions and restore marriage to a union between one man and one woman, as it always was before 2015, a mere 10 years ago. This is a crucial step in taking back our country, our culture, and our communities. You cannot conceive or birth children except for the coming together of a male and a female. You cannot have a company without children. You cannot perpetuate a country without the next generation. And you cannot raise strong children without moms and dads. It's just that simple.
Okay. Well, we knew this was coming. How much support is there for this bill?
It's like North Dakota already has a legislation on the books prohibiting same-sex marriage. It's just not enforceable right now because of the Supreme Court issue, and this is sort of just him reinforcing the North Dakota GOP's position that they are not in favor of same-sex marriage. And I think it's just important to shine the light on the fact that more than half the states in the union right now have laws similar to that where, say, the Supreme Court decided to overturn Obergefell, then they would be implemented again.
Trigger laws.
Yeah, trigger laws, similar to what we saw with the Dobbs v. Jackson decision that overturned abortion rights. So just one thing to keep in mind as
Well, there are cases. When last time I talked to Ed Yanka, he was very clear about the fact that there are cases working their way up to the Supreme Court that would give the Supreme Court the opportunity to get rid of Obergefell and basically all the federal protections for gay marriage.
Yeah, and much different Supreme Court makeup than there was when Obergefell was decided in 2015.
Mm-hmm.
3 more Donald Trump appointed judges are on the court now, and Clarence Thomas, in his concurring opinion for the Dobbs v. Jackson case, called for the court to review Obergefell again. So he has already indicated some support, or whatever you want to call it, some ideas of taking a look, quote unquote, at the case again. So very possible that we could see that play out in a similar way to abortion rights. So just another thing that the GOP and Project 2025 is cooking up.
Yeah. Rich, thank you so much for the good reporting you do for Heartland Signal, and thank you for sharing it with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Joan. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, my friend. I want to, as I wrap things up, I want to let you know that tonight, Patty is broadcasting live. Speaking of Wisconsin, she is at Minocqua Brewing Company. That's in Madison. I think they have more than one location. She's going to be in Madison. So she's going to be talking to Outside the Box host Ben Caminos, and that is all going to be starting when we come back from the news at 5 o'clock. Tomorrow on Choose Views, Richard is going to be taking calls as always and talking to the Senior Director of Financial Regulation at the Center for American Progress. Tomorrow, I am going to be joined by good friend Spencer Critchley. So this is your warning that, he's been serializing his next political book. And you have to go to dastardlycleverness.com. That's his podcast is Dastardly Cleverness in the Service of Good. And if you go to dastardlycleverness.com, you can get the latest chapter. I'm trying to remember, are we on chapter 6 or chapter 7? So this is our unofficial WCPT book club. Go to dastardlycleverness.com, read the newest chapter, and then if you want to weigh in on it, Spencer and I will be discussing it tomorrow, Wednesday, from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. Please join us then. And remember, the first hour of the show every day is for you. I want to open up the phone lines. I want to read your texts. I want to take your calls. On Friday, we do actually the first half of the show like that. But tomorrow we're going to start with you, and we are going to end with the WCPT Book Club. So join us then. That's going to do it for me. Have a great evening. Find something that brings you joy tonight. And I will see you tomorrow at 2 p.m. Good night, my friends.